David, tell me a little bit about who you are and what you've done.
David Katz. I'm a professor at the University of Haifa School of Environmental Sciences. I'm currently on leave at the Duke University in the States School of Environment. Um, and I've done a lot of work on water management, especially transboundary water management, and a lot of this work with this organization, EcoPeace, EcoPeace Middle East, which is a Israeli, Jordanian, Palestinian transboundary environmental organization, specializes on environmental issues that cross the boundary. And Gidon, I'm sure we'll talk about that more at length. Um, but specifically, my journey and how I started to work on these issues. I'd always been interested in this. I did a master's thesis on transboundary water back before there was a peace treaty, um, and was really interested in it. Um, uh, as many Israelis do after the army, I went traveling abroad, um, and found work in Thailand at an environmental organization and started doing work there. And it was on trade in the environment, international trade in the environment. Um, and the more I kept working, I was really interested in environmental studies, and I'd studied it, and I had written my thesis and everything. But when I really started working in the field, I felt a little bit that I didn't have a good enough background in economics, because a lot of the policy issues were economics related. After that, I came back to Israel and got a job with EcoPeace, um, which was sort of perfect. Just it was after the peace treaty at this point. EcoPeace sprung up, um, and was really this sort of combination of looking at the environment and regional partnerships, um, and started working on projects on the Dead Sea, on the Jordan River, a whole bunch of projects with EcoPeace. Um, and I worked there for several years. Eventually, wanted to go more in depth, went to get a PhD in environmental studies, and while doing that, I wanted to also strengthen my economics background. I got a master's degree in economics while I was doing my PhD in environmental studies. Um, but I always kept in touch with EcoPeace and kept working on projects on the Dead Sea and on the Jordan River Basin. Specifically with the ecosystem services part, I realized, especially 25 years ago, more in Israel, when you were talking about environmental studies, they didn't really take you seriously. They didn't know what it meant. But if you said something about economics, then they took you more seriously, right? If you were an economist, that's like a real job that people at least think they know what it is. And so for me, the economics was really just to bolster the environmental analysis, the environmental policy analysis, to make sure that it was something that would be taken seriously. If you can show the value of these ecosystem services, then it's not just do it because it's good for the macroinvertebrates, or do it because it's good uh, um, for your soul, which are also valid reasons to do these things. But they might be overlooked in policy debates. And so this was just one way to add more um, oomph, more credence to the environmental movement, to the environmental push for things like river restoration, restoration of the Jordan Sea. So one project that we did for EcoPeace was looking at um, the economic value of the restoration of the Jordan River.
And what were some of the substantive components of the valuation?
What? Sorry, I didn't catch that.
What were some of the substantive components of the valuation?
So when we looked at things like, sorry, we looked at some things like the value of tourism, the value of local development, um, but also did some valuation of what are called non-market values, or non-use values within the field of non-market values, non-use values. How much people just care about it and are willing to pay for this kind of thing, because they care, right? So policymakers are supposed to work to promote public welfare, and if this is something the public cares about, right, then you might be able to gauge it in some manner by how much they're willing to pay for it. And that's something that we saw um, in all in all three parties. So we looked in Israelis, Palestinians, and Jordanians, and all three had a positive willingness to pay um, above and beyond what they thought they were going to get back. We compared sort of their use values, the tourism and whatnot, to the non-use values, and the non-use values uh, were significant in many cases. Um,
how do you quantify something like that?
So those are mostly done by survey mechanisms. So we go out and we ask people, or we show them different scenarios and say, how much would you be willing to pay for this type of scenario versus that type of scenario, and we show them different levels of economic benefits, or sorry, environmental benefits, and then we ask them how much they'd be willing to pay. In some cases, they're not willing to pay, and that's fine. That's their true valuation. uh, we do some kind of testing to make sure that they don't just throw out wild numbers, right? So it has to be, we remind them of their budget, and we remind them that if they spend it on this, that's money that's not going to other things. So there's all sorts of protocols that you do in economics to make sure that that the responses are reasonable. Um, and there's also quite a large amount that are not willing to do it, not because they don't care. They actually really care. They just don't think that they should be the ones paying, right? So, if we ask the general public, they'll say, "But we didn't steal the water from the Jordan River. That's the government, or that's companies, or it's not our responsibility." And so, you have what are called protest zeros, people who really do want this, um, and we have to ignore those. And so, in some ways, it's sort of an underestimate of their true desire to see these kind of things restored, to see the ecological restoration. But that's one of the things you do to add credence to your, or reliability, believability to your study.
And so how do you kind of couple that with the policy side? How do you communicate that to policyholders, to policymakers about the importance of restoration?
Right. I think especially policymakers at the local level, right? They want to know, what potential do we have for tourism? What potential do we have for economic development in the region if something like this were to go forward? And then they can be sort of the ones who push it forward at the national level. But of course, Guidon's much more of an expert at the lobbying and the utilizing these kind of things. I'm sort of the scientist in the background, but these are the kind of things that you do to show the relative benefits when it comes up in a policy debate and people say, well, but it cost X, Y, and Z to do this. You want to say, okay, but look at the benefits, right?
So if
And
you
we're
think
only
about
catching a small amount of the benefits, right? There's a lot that you just can't capture.
So when you think about how to make freshwater restoration projects, obviously this one's a pretty difficult one because it's transboundary. When you think about how to make them successful, what kind of advice can you give to people who want to make freshwater restoration projects successful?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll defer to Guido on that, who's more on the policy advocacy side. But it's important to have good science. It's important to have the numbers, and not just to make a moral case or an ethical case, but to really have the scientific data on first of all, what are the environmental benefits, what are the social benefits, and what are the economic benefits, and costs, right? And it might be that it fails the cost benefit analysis, but it's still worthwhile for ethical or social reasons, right? For distributional reasons, right? It might benefit one people or one area, and that, even if it doesn't pass the benefit cost analysis, it might be worthwhile. But at least you should have that information so you can make informed decisions.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Really, really appreciate it.